Welcome to the Commander Congregation. Let's play.
Rikk starts the game by casting Myriad Landscape. Dave follows up with a less impressive forest and passes the turn. Paul gets fancy and plays an island and cycles Ash Barrens. Chris plays an island. Rikk drops a forest and casts Elvish Visionary, passing the turn. Dave plays a swamp, and then he taps out to cast Sakura Tribe Elder. The table groans because they've seen this before. Paul plays Altar of the Brood and starts the hate train. He plays a swamp and his opponent's mill a card. Chris has no idea what's going on and plays another island. Rikk plays a swamp and attacks Paul for first blood. In response, Dave sacrifices the Sakura Tribe Elder, searches for a swamp, and in response to that, Rikk sacrifices Myriad Landscape for 2 forests. Starting his turn, Dave plays a forest, and then he casts Meren from the command zone. On his end step, he doesn't have enough experience counters, so Sakura Tribe Elder goes back to his hand. Paul plays a forest, and his opponent's mill a card. Paul plays a Risen Reef, and his opponent's mill a card. Chris cycles a remote isle before his turn. On his turn, Chris plays Springjack Pasture. Then he plays Nadir Kraken. Rikk plays a swamp and casts his commander. Then he attacks Paul again, because why not? Dave plays a forest, then Sakura Tribe Elder. He also casts a Spore Frog this turn, pulls a Rikk, and attacks Paul. After combat, he sacrifices Sakura Tribe Elder for a forest, and Sakura Tribe Elder goes back to his hand. Paul plays a forest, forgets the trigger. Then he casts Farseek and miraculously remembers this one, so his opponent's mill a card. Then he plays an Omen of the Seas, and his opponent's mill again. On Chris's turn, Nadir Kraken triggers, he draws a card, makes a tentacle, and the Kraken gets bigger. Then he drops an island, plays Sarpadian Empires Volume 7, choosing Blue Camerid, and passes the turn. Rikk plays another swamp and casts Primal Druid for the turn. Then he plays Find Finality, choosing Find, and plays Blood Artist from his graveyard. He savagely attacks Paul again, passing the turn. Dave plays a swamp and then he plays Sakura Tribe Elder from his hand. Changing things up a bit, he casts Fleshbag Marauder, and as it enters, he sacks it to itself and makes his opponent sacrifice something they actually care about. Rikk didn't like that, so he makes Dave take all 4 of those Blood Artist triggers. Then he sacrifices the Sakura Tribe Elder for yet another swamp, and this time returns it directly to the battle, passing the turn. Paul opens the turn with a Coiling Oracle and his opponent's mill a card. Then he plays an Evolving Wilds and his opponent's mill again. On his turn, Chris's Nadir Kraken gets bigger and makes another token. Then he casts Jalira, Master Polymorphist, and passes the turn. Rikk plays a Foul Orchard tap, and then he casts Mazarek Crawl Death Priest. He casts Grizzly Salvage and adds Algae Gariel to his hand. Dave tries to get sneaky and plays an Okran Assassin. Then he evokes a Shriekmaw to kill Jalira, because it was the first non-black creature he saw. Rikk didn't like that and pings Dave with the Blood Artist trigger. Meren triggers at Dave's end step, and Dave returns the milled Wood Elves to the battlefield, and also grabs the forest. Paul plays Yarok from the command zone, his opponent's mill for 2, and the table groans because they saw it coming. Then he plays a forest and his opponent's mill another 2 cards, then he passes the turn. Nadir Kraken triggers, makes a token, and grows. Chris plays his own Myriad Landscape and passes the turn. Rikk plays a Pitiless Plunder, then he plays Algigari. Then he swings an 11-11 Jarad at Dave, he blocks it with a Sakura Tribe Elder, sacrifices that Sakura Tribe Elder, and Rikk decides to ping him with the Blood Artist trigger because the damage didn't go through. At the end of his turn, he creates a treasure token and passes. Dave plays a swamp and brings out Thieving Amalgam. He attacks Rikk with Okran Assassin and Meren, and puts the Assassin's Death Touch on Mazarek. Rikk repays in kind with a Blood Artist trigger, Meren triggers, and Okran Assassin comes back to the battlefield. On Paul's upkeep, Thieving Amalgam triggers, Dave manifests the top card of Paul's library, and Paul really doesn't like that. So he casts Peregrine Drake, his opponent's mill 2, he untaps 10 lands, and I swear this man is cheating at this point. Then he evokes a Muldrifter, opponent's mill 2, he draws 4, and Rikk pings him with a Blood Artist. Paul plays a Sunken Hollow in his opponent's mill 2. Then he plays a Boundless Realms, and in his opponent's mill 16 cards! Rikk and Dave start politicking, they think it's gone on long enough. Chris is just happy to be here, and he makes a token from the Sarpadian Empire. At the start of Chris's turn, Dave manifests the top card of Chris's library. Chris plays a Royal Elemental, and then he plays Temple of the False Gods and steals the Thieving Amalgam. Irony, right? At the start of Rick's turn, Chris gets to manifest the top card of Rick's library. Then Rikk plays Journey to Eternity on his Elvish Visionary. Then he throws it with Jarad and deals 3 damage to each opponent. This time he puts the Blood Artist trigger on Paul. Just for fun, he attacks Chris with a beefy 22-22 Jarad, and it's blocked by the Royal Elemental so Dave can get his Amalgam back, passing the turn. Dave starts off with a Fierce Empath, adding Harvester of Souls to his hand. Then he plays that Harvester of Souls. He attacks Paul with Orton Assassin, Meren, Thieving Amalgam, and 2 manifests. The Orton Death touches Yarok, 10 damage gets through. Meren triggers on the end step and returns a milled Reclamation Sage to the battlefield, and that blows up the Altar of the Brood. Paul declares war. Dave manifests the top card of Paul's library on his turn, and Assault is real. Then he casts Victimize on his Coiling Oracle to return Muldrifter and Yarok to the battlefield. Rikk pings Chris with the Blood Artist because who even cares at this point? Paul casts Road of Return to return Altar of the Brood. Then he casts a Runescarred Demon to tutor for 2 cards. Rikk asks him what he's getting, but Paul's not as dumb as he looks, so he doesn't answer. Worth a try, man. Paul casts Altar of the Brood, followed by Ghostly Flicker on his Runescarred Demon and Peregrine Drake. His opponent's mill 4. Runescarred Demon tutors for 2 more cards, and he untaps 10 lands. This has gotta be f***ing cheap. Then he casts Thassa's Deep Dwelling, and his opponent's mill another 2. He keeps his turn going by casting Garuda, Doom of Depths for another mill 2 trigger, putting the mill 4 ability on the stack twice. With that ability, he selects Demon of Dark Schemes and Sire's Stagnation. Wait! We noticed we had a missed trigger when Demon of Dark Schemes entered. Demon of Dark Schemes hits all creatures with -4/-4. That killed 13 creatures! Paul takes 13 damage from Blood Artist, Dave draws a bunch of cards from his Harvester of Souls, and Paul moves to his end step, attempting to trigger Thassa. But in response, Rikk reanimates Phyrexian Delver with Atzel, Cave of Eternity. He targets Lord of Extinction, and yeets it with Jarad's ability, and everyone loses a ton of life because Paul had been milling everybody the whole game. What a play! Rikk wins the game!